I'm going to keep the screen on, okay? And I'm going to talk to you a bit about what happened. And let's divide the Maimonidean controversy into three historical periods. The first was during Rambam's lifetime. He was attacked for two reasons, neither of which are really connected with the philosophical positions he addresses in the Moreh Nevukhim. When did he write the Moreh Nevukhim? Do you remember the year he finished it in? I'll give you a clue. I'll tell you, 1190. When did he die? 1204. So this was his last book. It was written in Arabic, of course. The book he wrote in Hebrew, and he was very proud of his Hebrew, was the Mishneh Torah. That is the great code of Jewish law, okay? So that was written in Hebrew, and that was circulated fairly widely in the East, all over the East, and it got to Provence in the south of France, which wasn't part of the Caliphate of Cordoba, which of course is the Muslim conquest of Spain, but it was read there, and one of the sages of Provence who lived in Poisquières was Rabbi Avraham ben David, known as Ravad in Israel, or the Raavad in the yeshivas we studied in Europe and in those Lithuanian outposts in the Holy Land. So the Raavad, who was older than the Rambam, he decided that the Rambam's book was very dangerous because it cut the umbilical link between halakha and the Talmud. Those instead of opening up a Gemara and learning Masechet Shabbat and Psachim and Yoma and Gittin and Kiddushin, you'd open up the Rambam's code, beautifully written, okay? It seems to be so logical and so clear that you don't need to look at anything other than perhaps the Torah Shebichtav and the Rambam's code. Raavad was very upset. He said that we've never learned halakha that way. We shouldn't get used to learning it that way, and it is very dangerous. And if he did it, why didn't he give us his sources? So what the Raavad did, he was quite old. He didn't have too many years left, but he made a concerted effort. He went through the entire Mishneh Torah. He pointed out all those places where he thought the Rambam had either misinterpreted the Gemara, arrived at a conclusion that was contrary to the view of most of the halakhic authorities. So this was the first, if you like, issue that the Rambam got involved in. Now, he wasn't particularly affected by the Raavad's critical notes. Remember, distances were great and there wasn't that much communication, but he did get into trouble on similar grounds with the Gaon of Baghdad. Remember his name? Rabbi Samuel ben Ali. Exactly. Eli, Ali, okay, potato, potato. So whoever it is, but he was, as the Rambam would have said, he was a jumped up Gaon. The true Gaonim had finished with Rav Hai in Babylon. This Rabbi Samuel ben Ali comes along in Baghdad. He has a huge yeshiva called Gaon Yaakov with branches all over the east. And he wants to reintroduce the Gaonate. And he himself, as I said, he sucked up a lot of money. He made himself an authority. He had many scribes to write answers to questions. And he would go around with 60 bodyguards and living a very opulent life. But Rambam said, I don't care for this at all. Far too much money, a lot of corruption here. And anyhow, he's pretty ignorant. And so is his son-in-law, Zechariah, who he wants to make his successor. And eventually that Gaonate, of course, did fall apart. But in order to make the Rambam feel bad and to rally support, Rabbi Samuel ben Eli said, and you know what? Not only has he written an unorthodox code of Jewish law, but he actually is a heretic because he doesn't believe in physical resurrection. And the Rambam wrote his Igeret Teiman, okay, the famous letter about, Igeret Chiat Amitim, the letter about the physical resurrection, when he realized that whole communities were tearing themselves apart over this. And Yemen in particular, which as we'll see, he had helped a lot. Rambam was very helpful for the Yemenite Jews. They were also split. So there were some who were for Rambam, some who were against, and there was a lot of dangerous schism. So the Rambam came to the conclusion he did, which we addressed last week. There'll be a physical resurrection, but it won't last for that long. And eventually, even the resurrected will die, and we will all live forever as pure spirits. Okay, so I mentioned the first sort of hot water Rambam got into in his lifetime, but he died in 1204, and 2 weeks before his death, Rabbi Shmuel ibn Tibon completed the Hebrew translation of the Moreh Nevukhim. Now, Shmuel ibn Tibon lived in Provence, and Provence was a place, I'm talking about Poitiers and Nîmes and Béziers and Narbonne and all of these places that we are very familiar with. Also, of course, Montpellier, all right? So Montpellier, of course, Mont meaning what? Mountain. And mountain, exactly. And what is Pellier? That you probably don't know, but it is connected with woad, W-O-A-D, the blue dye that the warriors, the Celtic warriors, would daub themselves with, and it's a Latin term. But
Someone knows this in German?
How do we say it in German? Well, Mont is a berg, and the Pellier is bloy color. Okay, so it's as it were Blauberg, but the blau is the blue dye that the Celts used to paint themselves when they went to war, a bit like the Red Indians and their war paint. Okay, so there we are. And of course, the rabbi of Montpellier, who we're going to get involved with shortly, is called Shlomo. So in Hebrew, he's Harav Shlomo Min Hahar. By the way, is there a mountain in Montpellier in the south of France? No mountain. There was a pile of stones. Okay, anyhow, so it's translated into Hebrew, and everybody in Provence, which was probably the most sophisticated Jewish community outside of the East where Rambam lived, either in Spain or in North Africa, okay, they are very urbane. There's a group that is very wealthy, doctors by and large, and they were influential in the courts of the kings and the counts of Provence and of France. Now, poorer Jews tended to be less educated, and they were more interested in spiritual things, especially the Kabbalah, which had begun to spread in the 13th century. Remember, if you want to read Kabbalah without reading Kabbalah, read Ramban Nachmanides on the Parsha. He gives you a lot of Kabbalistic doctrines in his commentary. But people were going into Kabbalah. There was Christian persecution. So several things worked together to make Provençal Jewry, on the one hand, very receptive to the Rambam's Moreh Nevukhim. The more educated you are, the wealthier you are, the more you mix with educated and enlightened Christians, you want to show that you are equally educated and well enlightened. And for example, if they regard stories in the Bible as allegories, you might too. You might go really, really extreme and say, well, Avram and Sarah are actually allegories for Chomer and Surah. Avram, of course, is a Surah, is the form, and Sarah is the Chomer, is the matter. Then we are all on board with Aristotle. And that, as cultured, educated medievals of that time, is where we want to be, with Aristotle. Although, of course, Plato and the mystics are waiting in the wings for their day. But that's what the elite was interested in. They may have been a little lax in their observance. They dismissed the superstitions and the customs that have no basis in the Gemara. Now, the other group that attacked them was much more interested in tradition, in stories, in mysticism, in angels, in Tchiat HaMetim, in re-meeting their family members, okay, at the end of time. So you got a lot of tension here. And by the way, there was a lot of tension in Christian society at the same time. Provence was the center of the Albigensian heresy and the Cathars, Cathars, and the Catholic Church persecuted them. They were more for, again, an allegorical approach, and they were also concerned with social justice, wanted to break down the power of the church and the landed aristocracy. So a lot of forces are coming to bear on Provence. And then the bombshell arrives, a Hebrew version of Rambam, the famous Rambam of Mishneh Torah fame, okay? The great halachist has written a book that makes it possible for Jews to be almost full-blooded Aristotelians, share the common culture of the rich and of the wealthy and of the educated. As I said, they were physicians, courtiers, and financiers. So we got an explosive situation here. And because of this explosive situation, a certain rabbi of Montpellier, Rabbi Shlomo ben Avraham, Rabbi Shlomo Minahar, gets two of his Talmidim together, one of whom is Rabbi Yonah ben Avraham Gerondi. Have you heard of him?
Yeah. Yes.
Rabbeinu Yonah. Okay, if you haven't, look him up. Okay, which famous book did he write? Sharei Tshuva, a book on repentance. And he had something to repent for, as we will shortly see. The other student was somebody called Rabbi David ben Shaul, who was a great machmir. You know, if you could be strict about anything in halakha, he would be strict. Recently, Pinchas Roth brought to light a manuscript of his about Yain Nesech, wine made by non-Jews, which was very important for the diet of all people in the Middle Ages, and you need to be easy with it if you're going to drink anything. But he was very strict. And what does he do? Rabbi Shlomo gets his two students to make a bet din and to put a cherem on anybody who reads the Moreh Nevukhim. Now, you know what a cherem is, I assume. Anybody not know what a cherem is? A ban, ostracization. And in those days, it was serious, because if you were ostracized by your Jewish community, you had nowhere to go. Remember the Merchant of Venice, okay? Once you're out, a bit like the world of fashion. Today you're in, tomorrow you're out. So this is serious. The ban is very serious indeed. And once the ban is declared with candles and a shofar and the whole rigmarole, the cherem is sent to all the rabbis in Provence and the Iberian province, which is Spain and Portugal. I want you all to sign on, says Rabbi Shlomo. This is a dangerous book, has to be suppressed. Don't let any Jews read the Moreh Nevukhim. Do all the rabbis come on board in Provence and Iberia? No, they don't. So what does Rabbi Shlomo do? He says, I want you, Rabbeinu Yonah, to go to France, northern France, territory of the Balei HaTosafot. Now, there's no Aristotle there. There's no Greek, Latin, no philosophy. They're just from Jews who love learning Gemara. So when they are told by Rabbeinu Yonah that there's a book out there that talks about Aristotle, perhaps replacing Moshe Rabbeinu, and allegories, perhaps the 12 tribes are actually the 12 planets, okay? And etc., etc. And there's no Tchiat HaMetim in a physical form. And God doesn't necessarily intervene and make miracles left, right, and center. This is a big problem for them. And they say, we will sign on. So all the French rabbis sign on. Rabbeinu Yonah rushes back to Montpellier and he says to Reb Shlomo Minahar, look, we've got the French rabbis on board. So what do the Maimonideans do? They also get their champions to go all over Provence and Spain and make an anti-Rabbi Shlomo Minahar Cherem and put Shlomo Minahar and his two students, Rabbeinu Yonah and Rabbi David, into Cherem. So one Cherem is hurled against another Cherem, and the wars of the Jews are starting to gain traction, and they, as usual, tear communities apart. I won't eat with you. You're a Maimonideist. You read the guide, and I will not eat with you because you are ignorant, a simpleton, and you're influenced by Christianity. You don't know what you're talking about, and I will never eat with you or let my daughter marry your son. This is what we did in the past. I'm not sure we do it today, but there we are. Only you can be the judge of that. So, what do the Maimonideans do? They turn to the aged and rather ill scholar, Rabbi David ben Kimchi, known by his acronym Radak, famous Provençal, grammarian, Bible commentator. Who hasn't heard of the Radak? Jeff, are you okay with Radak?
Yep.
Okay, good. So he is too ill, in fact. He gets to Castile. He wants to speak to the rabbis of France, of Spain, I mean, and he's too ill to proceed. So he sends a letter to Rabbi Judah ibn al-Fakhar. Now, Rabbi Judah ibn al-Fakhar, I'm going to go into share screen now. That will be this one. Good. Is a famous physician. He is a courtier, member of the court, and he was perceived to be a friendly to Maimonides. Let's read a little of the Megillat, of the Igrot Knaot, the letters of zealousness. Kamu Montpellier, these are the Maimonideans speaking. There arose in Montpellier base people. Rav Echadim Shnei Talmidav, they don't even mention his name. Okay? Some rabbi and his two students. And they lead the majority, they lead the public astray, and they speak seditious words against God and his Messiah. Who is God's Messiah? Rabbeinu Moshe ben Rabbeinu Maimon Zatzal, the Rambam. Adashe kinu chachmei bederes. Bederes is Bezier. V'Narbona and Narbonne. V'yeter kilot Provence. L'Elohehem v'nidu v'echrimu gimel achotim ha'ele b'nafshotam. These three sinners made a cherem on the Rambam. Where's that phrase chotim ha'ele b'nafshotam come from? Nadav and Avihu, remember, went in with their ketoret hachatayim ha'ele b'nafshotam. V'chirotam ki chalta lehem hara im shchenehem. So and then when they realized they weren't going to succeed with the locals in Provence and Spain, they sent letters to France, and there was hasata, sedition, and they incited the French rabbis to go ahead with the cherem. But then the Maimonideans got together, and they appointed the old sage Rabbi David ben Kimchi, sent him to go to Spain, and he was going to see the Catalonians in Aragon, and he didn't get there, but he sent a letter. And so the letter was sent to the Chacham Rabbi Yosef Zal ben al-Fakhar. Okay, now, what did Rabbi Judah, son of Yosef ben al-Fakhar, write? Well, this is a famous letter, well, for those who are interested in this topic. And it starts off with Yigar Hashem B'cha Hasatan. David Hu Katan. It's all rhyming, by the way. So he insults the Radak. He calls him a Satan, and then he calls him a Katan. Me'ayin tavo hamashot ba'aretz u'mitalech ba. Where are you coming from, you wanderer on the earth? Now, where is that verse lifted from? Opening verse in the book of Job, where all the angels come in the Satan. God says, where have you been, Satan? And he says, Mishut ba'aretz u'mehitalech ba. I've been wandering around. Actually, Job, Satan says, there's nobody who is as faithful as Abraham, your servant. And then God says, well, how about my servant Eov? And then Satan says, well, let's test him. And that's the book of Job. But lecharcher riv umadon, you Radak want to incite controversy. Halo yadata ino shamata ki miktzat divrei Moreh Nevukhim Nevukhim hem baaretz sagar alehem hamidbar. The Moreh Nevukhim is a book of basically author who got lost. Where does that phrase come from? Locked in and wandering in the wilderness.
Paro,
Jean?
c'est
Exactly. Paro said of Bnei Israel when he heard that they were at the side of the sea, Sagar ale Nevukhim hem baaretz. They've lost their way. Geblonjet in Midbar. Okay, Shmuley. You understand? Shmuley's gone, or not. But that's how we would have said it in Gateshead, right? They haben geblonjet geworen in the Midbar. Okay? And that's your Moreh Nevukhim. So he plays on this. I mean, their ability in Hebrew is just scintillating. Bidabro, and we've only begun. I'm not going to read it all. Bidabro al amidat hashemesh begivon al pi aton, val diviaton nachash kalton, kizeva mareh navua v'derech mashal nireh, v'chol yerei dvar Hashem u'mamin emunat shomem Yisrael yishtomem al hamareh. Now he attacks Rambam point by point. All the stories that we read in the Torah, they're actually parables and metaphors, okay? And the Rambam says this, and this is in contradiction of a Mishnah that points out that these things were created on the first Friday afternoon. And then there's Inyan HaKadmut, the usual suspects, the eternity of the universe. It always did exist. Rambam does moderate it, but the world will not come to an end. Now, Al-Fakhar agrees with the attack on corporeality. And in fact, almost everybody agreed. God doesn't have a body. Anybody sophisticated, God doesn't have a body. Even Kabbalah, though it has a body, that body is clearly very spiritualized. Okay? So, that's okay. But the fact that the world is not going to come to an end, the fact that Rambam could even have entertained the possibility that Aristotle, had he been philosophically sound, would have been used to interpret the Torah and deny the act of creation out of nothing. That's not possible. And then he goes on to say, moreover, we do suspect the Greeks of what he calls, let's see if you can get this, line 32. Chachma shakranit shenikra b'lashon Yavan. What's that word? Line 32. Sophistica, which is sophistry, exactly. Now the sophists were more clever than they were truthful. That's where they were trained to be. So what Al-Fakhar says is that you never know when you're dealing with Greeks if they're being logical or they're being sophisticated. They're just spinning out nice arguments. So you can't trust them, and therefore they could have, sorry, Deb? Especially if they're bearing gifts, says Debbie on my left. Don't trust Greeks if they're bearing gifts. Thank you, Deb. Lilkod chachamim ba'orma, lefi darkeinu lamadnu, שהסומך על דבריהם בדברי תורתו לא יצא חובתו, וכל שכן עניין מופת הקדמות, שהוא פוסל את השבת. And what happens if you don't believe in the creation of the world out of nothing, that there was something there? Why keep Shabbat? And he goes on about Shabbat. Is Shabbat a parable too? And how come the guy who was collecting sticks in the wilderness was put to death? Why was he put to death? He was breaking Shabbat. But if Shabbat is just some kind of parable and not really the scientific truth about how the world came into existence, why would we keep Shabbat? And anyhow, he says, all those people who read the Moreh Nevukhim, they only do it because nirpim hem nirpim. Who said nirpim hem nirpim? Paro, again, Bnei Israel, when they complained about their hard work and they want to go into the wilderness, you're lazy. These people who read the Moreh Nevukhim are simply lazy. They're looking for a way out, They don't understand it. Uposchim al shnei sipim, and they want to keep on dallying between two comfortable zones. They want to be philosophical, they want to be frum, and they can't do it, but they pretend that they can. Who said to whom?
Eliyahu Hanavi.
Eliyahu Hanavi. Ad mata atem poskim al. והם באמת יורדים אינם עולים, לא תורה נוגע להם ולא שם חוכמה יוונית נקרא בם. They've got no philosophy, they've got no Torah, and then they think that the Moreh is going to lead them to the desired place. And actually, all they're doing is making their dilly-dallying and their uncommitted lives stick according to the authority of Maimonides. Ma ya'atz lelo chokhmah v'tala Torah b'ma v'chol mikra hapnimim machar livnei hayivanim. And the Rambam, or whoever it was who translated it into Hebrew, okay, and he's going to blame Ibn Tibbon shortly, they have caused the Torah to be sold. Its pearls are now thrown and cast to the Greeks. Now he gets personal. Line 3. Yomarna kimchi sheshmot semach b'liyaseh kemach. Rabbi David Kimchi, the name kemach, of course, is flour. So it says flour is unsophisticated. It's a vegetable, hasn't been processed yet, and that's all it's good for. Matai nitnu mikrai kodesh lidaresh b'dmut chokmat hayivanit ve'ilchu achoranit v'lo chen hadavar ki mitzion tetzei Torah. You want Torah, go to Tzion. You want philosophy or sophistry, go to the Greeks, but never the twain shall meet. Don't mix them up. V'tisa kol ha'ida v'itnu et kolam al ota sefer morah kulam ki moledet chutz lo yavo lehem mikal Hashem v'gazru shlo. Okay, now we come to the cherem. And Rabbi Al-Fachar said, you know what? Cherem isn't such a bad idea. But now we get to the problem that all the antagonists and enemies of the Moreh had. Who wrote the Moreh Nevukhim? Rambam. Was the Rambam a great rabbi, scholar, as far as we know, a very righteous and from man? He was. So what are we going to do with the fact that this great paragon of rabbinic learning suddenly seems to be somewhat of a heretic? But we are all in awe of the Rambam, and we have to honor him. He knows everything about everything. ויותר מהנה מידותיו רבות ונכבדות, תורת אלוהיו בקרבו ותרועת מלך בו. הוא כתב משנה תורה הזאת על ספר, אשר עומד לנס עמים, ומפיו תורה יבקשו, כי מלאך השם צבאות הוא. Listen to the opponent. Rambam is like an angel of God. ואחריו לא קם כמוהו. Nobody like him ever arose. וחייבים אנו לדון אותו על כף זכות. ואין להרהר אחר מידותיו, כי מה האדם שיבוא אחרי המלך? ודמיתם להעלות את רבנו משה ז"ל למעלה מהנביאים, אשר לא ציווה ולא דיבר איתכם, ולא עלתה על ליבו העולה על רוחכם. You misunderstood the Rambam, and that's why you've all gone astray. He never meant the book to be publicized widely. He meant it to be studied in small groups and not made public. And who's the real criminal in the whole story? Guess who?
Ibn
No?
Tibbon.
Who?
Ibn Tibbon.
Ibn Tibbon. Thank you. As always, Jean. Formidable. Okay? Hit the nail on the head. Look. V'hem lo yadu din ha-sefer v'dato. Line 12. Nobody understood or read carefully what the Rambam wanted from his book. The book was a book to a select group of people who really were looking for philosophically sophisticated answers, but not for the whole community. And it was written in Arabic, in a language which was understood by people like his student, Yehuda ibn Yosef ibn Shimon. And Yosef ibn Shimon is part of the elect in the East, who know, and their Muslim counterparts also know and read and believe in the Aristotelian approach to Judaism. So it's his fault. The first culprit is Ibn Tibbon. And it's turned out really badly. He has caused your Provençal people to fall by the wayside. It's not righteous, it's a cry. Be innocent, be perfect. Tamim. It's no wonder that Ramban Nachmanides wrote an essay, a famous essay called Torat Hashem Tamima. Torat Hashem Tamima, okay? But what does that mean? Go almost naively. Take your faith as a child. Do not get involved in the sophisticated Aristotelian type theological doctrines and ideas and revolutionary stuff. Just go to, of course, the Ramban Nachmanides. He compensated for the simplicity with great sophistication because, as Debbie said, he was a Kabbalist and introduces his Kabbalah. But he says the secrets of Judaism are in the Kabbalah. They're not in rationalism. So he would be, I don't know, a good Chassid perhaps, okay? Mystic, a Kabbalist. But in any case, he wrote a letter because he was probably the greatest rabbi in his time. Certainly in the Iberian Peninsula, nobody came close to Nachmanides. Talmudic authority, halachist, a Kabbalist, a physician, brave spirit, somebody who spoke without fear to King James and to the whole court in Barcelona in the famous disputation. Remember, he had with Nicholas Donin and to defend the Talmud and Jewish religion. He did so extremely well. And the king, what was his famous remark? The king said at the end, I've never heard such an eloquent and intelligent defense of something so false. In other words, he won the disputation. But of course, the Franciscans and the Dominicans never forgave him. And whilst he got a free pass from the king, it didn't help. And the king said, you better leave quickly. And he did. And he came on Aliyah. Okay. And he spent the last 5 years of his life in Eretz Yisrael. That's where he completed his Perush on the Torah. The Ramban also weighed in. And the Ramban is a very sophisticated weigh-in. And here we are. Biroti atzatchem haTorah niskemet, ve'idadatchem hakadosha chotemet. Kol godrei peretz upachot, from Pecha, that is a governor of the earth. Kulam iskimu lenadot ulachrim et kol ish asher yado yarim la'agot sefer Moreh Nevukhim, v'sefer Hamadah karno yigadea. He talks about the cherem. And then he says, look, it's all very well, but it's too extreme. The cherem is too extreme. Number one, okay, you can't make a cherem against all and sundry. You have to be more forensic, limited, okay? And why? Well, the reason, and he begins with this, is that Rambam is to be treated with the utmost respect. And this is always the problem. When you get somebody who has got such a huge rabbinic halachic reputation, saying something that might not be considered from in all quarters, it is a problem. You can dismiss somebody who has no halachic clout very easily. Well, he's an Amoritz, okay? But when it comes to the Rambam, well, he's not an Amoritz at all. On the contrary, he knows a lot more than any of us. So what are we going to do? So we have to find some type of middle way. But what we're going to do now is we're going to read some psukim here and there and see how Nachmanides, in a very sophisticated way, tries to deal with what he understands to be a very real issue. There is a lot of truth in Aristotle, a lot of truth in Greek thought and philosophy, and it wouldn't be bad for Judaism to take some of that on board. But Ramban says it's still a dangerous exercise. Now, he says, but your cherem is not the way to go about this, because of the Rambam himself. Now, what did he say about the Rambam? He says, look, in addition to the Rambam being a huge Talmudist, he also has saved Jews all over the world, okay? And if it wasn't for him, we would be in a very bad way, particularly in Yemen, for example, okay? But before that, he says, look, we have to deal with the fact that many of our Jews are not interested in the old-fashioned, frummy type of path, okay? These have been saved for Judaism by the Rambam. They would have been lost. They would have simply left the fold. So you have to bear that in mind. Number two, take Yemen, for example, okay? In the case of Yemen, he basically saved the community, okay? Because the community was in a lot of trouble. The Rambam wrote what he wrote, and he was able to keep the community together. Had he not done this, the community would have fallen apart, and then Jews would have started fighting each other en masse. He makes the point very strongly that you rabbis, Shlomo Minahar, Rabbeinu Yonah, Rabbi David ibn Shaul, and even Rabbi Judah ben Yosef al-Fakar, you do not need to grapple with Aristotle and Galen and Greek philosophy on a daily basis. Rambam didn't write his book for you. Line 36. V'lama pelile tzedek lo titnu machsom lifnei sifreichem v'hotzetem atak mipichem dvarim hanirim lekina v'sina ne'emarim asur l'shomam af ki lo omram im kol shten lekotvam שכתבתם על איש הקדוש שהוא בכל גלות צרפת וספרד לא קם כמוהו ובכל מיני חוכמות בקי וכל חיבוריו וספריו קו ונקי. line 38 at the end, פערתם פה לבליך חוק והערתם בדברים הנשמעים למרחוק. All of this is in rhyming in Hebrew. It's a wonderful thing to read. Do it in your spare time. Okay, AB? Not now. But I'm sure you'll do it word by word, line by line. It's beautifully written. But he says, you don't need the book. Rambam said it's not for you. So why are you reading it? Don't. Okay? And think of all the good things that the Rambam has done. And remember, as a halachist, he is superb. He is very supportive of Isurim, Kalin and Chamurin. Im hishmit kol takanot gzera v'lo asa siyag la Torah. Did he ignore even the fine details of Muktzeh or Tvul Yom or Eruvin? It's all in the Rambam. Im helim einav me Eruvin v'yadayim. Difficult mesechtas. Ba'ofu gvina nechalin ba'afikurin. And how you have your chicken and your cheese, midoraita, midrabanan, v'lo ichmir b'hin v'yotem min adin. I will explain that to you in an email. Okay? לא לכם רבותינו להקל ראש כנגד המזרח. ומי כצדוקים ומי נתן לבייתותים לשוסים. And who fought the Sadducees and the Karaites in Egypt? The Rambam. והוציאה דיריהם מחצר מלך מצרים מפחתו יגורו. ורבים מהם הארץ מתייעדים כי נפל פחד הרב עליהם. Where's that pasuk from? Megillat Esther, Mordechai. ונתחזק מורה על כולם. אני מעיד עלי לפני רבותיי שמיים וארץ, כי שמענו Now we have the whole thing about Teiman. Now I want you all to have a look at line 5, please. Is everybody looking? והנני מעיד עלי לפני רבותיי שמיים וארץ. I testify by the God of heaven and earth. Ki shamanu mimagidei emet. I heard this from truthful sources. Shebachol aratzot malchut Teman, throughout Yemenite Jewry. Kilot rabot oskim baTorah u'mitzvot lishman. Jews study the Torah and they do mitzvot for their own sake. Hayu maskirin sham shem harab b'chol kaddish v'kaddish. This is Nachmanides. Every time they say kaddish in Yemen, what do they say? V'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei the Rabbana Moshe ben Maimon. He got into the daily Kaddish. The lives of the scholars, ours and theirs, okay, in our lifetime, in their lifetime, and in the lifetime of Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. Asher he'ir enehem b'Torah, ve'midam b'keren orah, v'vatem mehem gzerot kashot. Now, when these kilot hear what you're doing, they will attack you, and there'll be more charamot, and everybody will be fighting each other. Is that how we want to look? Says Ramban. And anyhow, it's not going to help you. Are you going to stop people using their minds, going and reading Aristotle or Plato or Alexander or Themestius? They're not going to stop. So you think you're going to save them by a cherem? You're absolutely misguided. Okay? Therefore, our rabbis, actually, I am going to backtrack a bit, and I'm going to go to line 34 on page 1. I'd like you to follow me on this too, okay? Afki ele chochmot mutarot. Now he says that much of the Greek learning, on page 1, line 33, much of the Greek learning is perfectly permissible. In fact, it's necessary. Without astronomy, we won't know the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh of Yibur Shana. Okay? Rabotenu zal hisiranu bahem etzivanu alehem. Our rabbis taught us these sciences and this type of philosophy. Avdu sifrei chachmatenu v'avdan moladetenu. When we lost our ancestral homeland, and we lost our wisdom and our books. In other words, it's not that Aristotle is being introduced to Judaism. Judaism is being regained through Aristotle, because only Aristotle and the Greeks preserved the wisdom that was originally ours. Okay? And we'll see this worked out later on. With Alexander the Great and all that, okay, which is somewhere or the other. Where did Alexander go? If I put this bit in at all. But there is, we'll see that next week in the Ramah. The Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, makes a big deal of this. He takes this idea, he says that science, natural science, theoretical science, philosophy, and certain aspects of theology were part of the rabbinic tradition. They were studied by Alexander the Great in the East, and he brought them back, and his tutor Aristotle absorbed it all, added a few unorthodox Jewishly Greek stuff to pass it off as his own, but really, all of Aristotle, the good things in Aristotle, are originally Chazal. Now, it's an interesting idea. We'll work this up next week a bit more, but Ramban does mention this. So, what emerges from all of this? He says, Lachein Rabotenu. We're going to read on page 2 from line 12. Everybody with me? Lachein Rabotenu, Chushu leminechem. Vahavu mutunim bedinechem. Okay? Line 12.
Page 2.
Line 12 on page 3. Page on 12.3. Okay?
Line 3 on page 12.
Line
12 on page
12 on page 3.
Thank you.
In the middle. Lachen Rabotenu חושו למיניכם, הבו מתונים בדיניכם, be gentle, the way you go about these things. החרם yutar, disband the ban, no more ban. V'ha'ala tufar b'truat shofar, blow a shofar and cancel the excommunication. V'etzei dvar malchut milifnechem, lachrimu lenadot uleshamot, mi hamalig al agadot o marchiv peh al asmach ta'ot. What you can do is you can declare a cherem on those who declare that the entire Torah is one long metaphor. Of course, that would almost be like a form of Christianity. The Old Testament is a metaphor. And you can say that anybody who teaches Moreh Nevukhim to a crowd, by the way, are we a crowd? Well, then there's a cherem, okay, in case you didn't know. Okay? Remember in our second Shiur, we talked about this. Rambam says, I want you to study Moreh Nevukhim just by yourselves, or two at the maximum, and then I'm not going to tell you what I think. You'll have to work it out. Remember Yael connecting the dots exactly. So you've only got yourselves to blame. So don't go in for the book, okay? You can say not to be taught, not the main synagogue in Barcelona should not be open to 500 people all studying Moreh Nevukhim, okay? Like Kabbalah in a way, only for the select few, okay? V'chein amar b'tchilat sifro, he wrote in the beginning of his book, Ani mashpia ba'el, we read this, I swear, or make you swear by the Lord God, אפילו אות אחת לא יבאר זולתו, אלא משהו מבואר ומפורש בדברי מי שהקדימני מחכמי תורתנו. Whatever you can find in Chazal, you can spread. But whatever is uniquely mine, don't. Okay? אך ללמוד מה שלא אמר אחרי זולתי מגאון מזל, אל ילמדוהו לזולתו. זה תופס דברי רב ז"ל. אם אתם רבותינו תסכימו לחכמי פרובנצה, גם אנחנו נצא בעקבותיכם, תחזקו הדבר הזה בחרם ועלה. Now he says a very important line here, line 19 on page 3, שאי אפשר לכם להוכיח ולהפוך כל ישראל להיות חסידים. Interesting, isn't it? You cannot force every Jew to be a chassid. Forget it. You can be as frum as you want, but don't try and force the rank and file of the Jewish people into your mold of thinking. We never did that. Now you can say young people shouldn't learn the Moreh Nevukhim. So let's fix an age. Over 25 you can learn it. Under 25 you can't. In that way there'll be emet and shalom. Do you think this worked? I'm going back to the full screen. You can unmute. Do you think this worked? Did they cancel the ban? No, they didn't.
To
No,
whom
they
was
didn't.
this letter addressed? To Montpellier or to North France?
This was addressed to Iberia and to Provence.
Mhm.
The French rabbis, by the way, had already recanted. French rabbis already canceled their ban. So we've got Rav Shlomo Milahar, Rabbeinu Yonah, and Rabbeinu David ben Shaul, and a lot of Jews in Provence objecting to Moreh Nevukhim. Got Ramban, who comes in Spain, and the Spaniards, who says, well, there's a problem, but we have to be very, very gentle with this. What happened a year later? All this takes place in 1230, beginning of 1232. What happens at the end of 1232 in Provence? Who burns the Moreh Nevukhim?
Burning of Jewish books.
Just the Moreh Nevukhim, just by the Dominicans. Why did they burn the Moreh Nevukhim? Well, that's a long story. There are two versions. The Maimonideans say that Rabbi Avraham Minahar and his students complained to the Dominicans that this was a heretical book, spiritualizing the Bible out of all reality. Because of the Catholic Church's problems with the Cathars, the Dominicans were on the lookout for every heretical work, so they threw the guy for the perplexed onto the bandwagon. They put books on in Arabic, books in Hebrew, it didn't matter. They threw it all on and they burnt these heretical books. The only Jewish book, though, that was burnt was the Moreh Nevukhim. Some say that it was some of the frum crowd who simply said, the rabbis can't make up their minds. We're going to get this problem solved once and for all. Burn the book. Well, a couple of years later, the King of France, Philip, exiled all the Jews from France, okay? And because of the shock of the burning, and you got extremists from Europe going to Israel, to Tiberias, desecrating Rambam's tomb. They put graffiti on the tomb, okay? And the Talmud was burned in Paris in 1242, okay? A decade later, Rabbeinu Yonah, by the way, wrote Sharei Tshuva. According to the legend, he wrote it because he wanted to do Tshuva, because he realized that burning the Moreh Nevukhim was a prelude to burning the Talmud. 24 cartloads of Talmuds were burned in Paris, okay? Rechil of Paris tried to defend it, but he couldn't. And this is what happens. You begin by burning one book, then the books you really love, they'll all get burned. So don't burn any books at all, is the message. So he wrote a book on Tshuva. He's meant to have gone on a journey to the Rambam's tomb to beg his forgiveness, but he didn't get past Barcelona. He became ill, so he stayed in Barcelona, and he gave the famous Shabbat Tshuva drasha, and they say he asked forgiveness from the Rambam there. But the dispute died down because the Jews were in far too much trouble, okay? Book burnings, persecution, Christians starting to examine their books and saying which is heretical and which is not. And when you have a lot of tzoros from the outside, you might forget a minute about the wars of the Jews. But in the beginning of the 14th century, with a second wave of Maimonidean controversy. The second wave, again, involved a not front-rank rabbi, Abba Mari Astrukov Lunel, called Yarchi. Why is the rabbi of Lunel called Yarchi? Because Luna is moon, and moon in Hebrew is Yareach. So that's the Yarchi, Ibn Yarchi. He turned to the Rashba, the great Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, who was fairly old at the time, rabbi of Spain, Barcelona, author of Tshuvot HaRashba, Chidushei HaRashba on the Gemara, outstanding Talmudist, halachist, and posek for Spain. So the same complaint, Moreh Nevukhim, is full of heresy, encourages people to study the works of the Greeks. All this is damaging the faith. Let's ban the book. So let's issue a cherem. Rashba wasn't very happy, and he sent out some letters, and he wanted to test the waters, but a new arrival from Ashkenaz had arrived in Barcelona, called Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, otherwise known as the Rosh.
Right.
Remember, he fled because his teacher, the Maram of Rottenburg, had been put into the castle, and the huge ransom was demanded. Maram said, you don't pay a ransom, that's too heavy. And he stayed in the castle of Eisichenheim until his death. So the Rosh is much less philosophical. He says, of course, we got to go and ban the book. So on Shabbat Chazon, the 4th of Av, in 1305, which is July 26th, Rashba issues a cherem. But the cherem is actually not on the Moreh Nevukhim. It's on any member of the community who, being under the age of 25, shall read the works of the Greeks on natural science and metaphysics. Two of them go together. Because remember, in Aristotle, there's no clear line between natural science and philosophy of religion. Okay, we'll see how this comes under attack by the time we get to the 16th century. But for the time being, religion, religious philosophy, physics, chemistry, biology, nature, medicine, it's all part of one piece. So you can't read anything in Greek, whether in the original language or in translation. But you can read works on medicine or works by Jewish authors. But again, it was all directed to the Moreh Nevukhim, and there was a counterattack. A cherem against the cherem of the Rashba was issued in Barcelona itself by Rabbi Yaakov ben Machir ibn Tibon, who was, of course, a grandson of Rabbi Shmuel ibn Tibon. The Tibonites were great believers in philosophy, in Jewish theology. By the way, the father of Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibon, had translated from the Arabic Kuzari, Sadi Gaon's book on Emunot V'Deot, and Bachya ibn Pakuda's Chovot Halavavot. So this is a philosophical family. So they take up cudgels on behalf of the Rambam on Greek philosophy, and we have another fight, okay? Now, another opponent of the ban was the Meiri, Rabbi Menachem ha-Meiri, who lived in Perpignan, which is not far from Nîmes. All this is in southern France, in Provence, which was a bastion of intellectual Jewish rabbinic learning. And he makes 4 points. He wrote to the Rashba, and Rashba's Tshuva, by the way, Chelik Aleph, Siman Taf Yud Chet, has got the whole correspondence, all the letters back and forth, okay? And the Meiri made 4 points. He said, look, Rashba, the earlier ban initiated by Rabbi Shlomo Minahar failed. Don't make the same mistake, okay? You'll just end up in grief. Number 2, the Rambam studied Greek philosophy in depth. It won't harm you if you know how to make distinctions and do it properly, as the Rambam did. Number 3, without science and mathematics, you'll never understand astronomy, and you won't be able to work out a Jewish calendar. Finally, you'll drive the study of philosophy and Moreh Nevukhim underground. Is that really what you want to do? The best way is education. Just teach people what you think is the right way to deal with these things. But once you create a ban, you create antagonism, hackles are raised, and you won't be able to achieve anything good. So what happens is that, as I said, the correspondence is in the second phase, which is the early 14th century, is in the Tshuvot of the Rashba. And I did, in fact, I know I only have 2 minutes left, but I'll just show you the screen. And we'll go to 2 points made by, it just got a lovely name, 41. Harav Yedaya bar Avraham Hapenini, the dispenser of pearls. Pearls of wisdom, Yedaya Hapenini from Béziers, okay? So he makes 2 points. I'll just précis them for you. He was, by the way, an amazing young man. When he was 15, he wrote a 1,000-word poem in Hebrew, each line rhyming, beginning with the letter Mem. He was a musmak when he was 15. He wrote commentaries on the Talmud, Agadah, works on ethics, plays, one of these real Renaissance people before the Renaissance. And he wrote Bechinat Olam, which is a book I'd love to talk about, but I have no time, really making Rambam's philosophy more amenable to the general crowd. But he says 2 things. Number 1, he says philosophy helps. We would still be believing that God has a body if we didn't have any exposure to Greek philosophy and the Rambam's Moreh Nevukhim. And number 2, you'll never make people who thirst for knowledge give up that thirst and say, yes, okay, we'll just go back into what we believe to be benighted fundamentalism. It's not going to work. And you will lose the Jews, okay? And don't do that. That's not a good thing, okay? And then, of course, we've also got Kavod Harav, Hagadolus Farav, the fact that Rambam is, after all, the Rambam. So just make peace. Be nice for a change. And pray for the welfare of the Jewish people and for their unity. So I'm going to stop the screen share. I wanted to give you a flavor of the effect the book had on the Jewish world. So Rambam dies in 1204. At the beginning of the 14th century, you've still got a very active controversy over the Rambam's Moreh Nevukhim. What happened, and over the course of time, we'll focus on the 16th century, on the dispute between the Marshal and the Ramah over the Moreh Nevukhim and on philosophy, and we'll end up by me explaining to you how today you can study the Moreh Nevukhim at Gush Etzion, at a enlightened yeshiva. Okay, you could study Moreh Nevukhim at the best universities. You can study the Moreh Nevukhim in the yeshivot of the Mekubalim, the Kabbalistic yeshivot. How did this happen? Next week, same time, same channel. Hopefully, the news will be good. There'll be Yeshuot, Nechamot, and Besorot.
Amen.
Tovot.
Amen,
Are there,
amen.
any,
Sure.
are there any questions, Jeff?
No.
Are there
Very
any
good, that's great.
questions from anyone? Sorry, Dan? I will be asked later on, and I owe you an email, Jean. I will send it to you. Okay?